Tuition Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
Now let's go to the next topic, pasture and forage crops. Pasture and forage crops. What is a pasture? A pasture is a large area of land predominantly occupied by grasses or legumes, which we call pasture crops, which can be used to feed animals. A pasture is a large area of land predominantly occupied by grasses, either growing wide or established by man. Predominantly occupied by grasses, either growing wide on its own, or established by man. When it is growing wide, we call it natural pasture. When it is established by man, we call it artificial pasture. Now, what are forage crops? What are forage crops? Forage crops are crops that are planted essentially for feeding farm animals. Forage crops are crops that are planted essentially for feeding farm animals. Meanwhile, a pasture is a large area of land that is predominantly occupied by grasses that are grown on their own, wide, or they were planted by man. But forage crops, they are the crops that farmers took his time to cultivate, to plant, and to harvest so that they can go and feed to the animals. So forage crops are not essentially pasture. Some of them are pasture crops, but they are not essentially pasture and can be grown anywhere. Now let's look at uses of forage crops. Forage crops are used majorly for feeding livestock. Essentially, forage crops like all this one we put on the board: elephant grass, bama grass, then the forage legumes. Don't mind me. These are forage legumes. These are forage grasses. So Cento, Puriria, Crucial, they are used for feeding farm animals. Then for conservation of soil moisture, we plant these crops, especially legumes, sometimes for them to spread on the surface of the soil to prevent direct scorching of the sunlight on the land so that this moisture can be contained and conserved. Okay, we are talking about the artificial pasture. They are called sown or established pasture because they were planted by man, especially into a place where they were never before. Now, artificial pasture, they are not better adapted because that's not the natural environment. So they cannot survive easily than natural pasture. So the farm must do regular weeding, must apply fertilizer, must water, and must control pests and diseases for the pasture, and must take care of the pasture. But the natural pasture have some advantages. These include, number one, they contain good quality pasture, legumes, and grasses which were selected. They are better nutritious to the animals than natural pasture. Natural pasture contains the bush type, which animals may not enjoy. So natural pasture, they are more delicious to the animals. They are more nutritious to the animals. And then they contain selected species of grasses and legumes that are needed and required on the land. Meanwhile, natural pasture are assorted types grown anyhow, many of which may not be nutritious. Some of them might even be poisonous to the animals. Okay, let's look at the common examples of grasses as well as common examples of legumes. Don't forget, we said the grasses, forage grasses, forage legumes, they are put together as forage crops. Examples include one, elephant grass. We call elephant grass because it's very long and giant. Its botanical name is Penicetum purpureum. Penicetum purpureum. We have Guinea grass. Its second name is Panicum maximum. We have giant Cynodon plectrustaceum. That's giant star grass. We have carpet grass. This is very common. Asonopus compressors. So we have carpet grass, Asonopus compressors. Then the spread grass, Impreta cylindrical. We have Bahama grass, Celadon dactylon. We have northern gamba grass, Adropogon gaianus. We have southern gamba grass, Adropogon tectorum. Most of these grasses can grow any part in Nigeria, but they are commonly found or mostly found in the northern state because that's a natural place. Then we have examples of forage legumes. We have Centrosema pubens. That's the scientific name. Excuse me. When you write a botanical name, the first letter should be capital, while the other letters should be small letters, and then must be underlined. So, good. Centrosema pubens, Stylosanthus gracilis, Crucio opiro, Pureria facilodis, Calopogonum mucunoides, Mucuna utilis, and Sonhem, Cotyleria juncea. These are examples of forage legumes. These are examples of forage grasses. Now, forage grasses give, most of them give carbohydrates to the animals, but the forage legumes still have a little of protein that could be afforded the animals. And forage legumes provide nitrogen to the soil. Because they are leguminous crops or plants, they can be able to trap nitrogen to the soil through the bacteria that lives in their nodules. Okay, now how do we establish the pasture? Or rather, what are the factors that can affect the productivity of a pasture? When you have planted a pasture, what are the factors that can make the pasture to be productive or to be not productive? Number one is persistence. This is the ability of a pasture to survive by vegetative means. The ability of the pasture to survive by vegetative means. We just studied the vegetative propagation at that time. So, and I gave examples of natural vegetative propagation. I mentioned runners and stolon, and I said grasses are a sample. So a good grass must be able to grow by running, must be able to persist. So persistence is the ability of a pasture to grow on its own by vegetative means, either by running or by stolon. Okay? Then we have aggressiveness. This ability of a pasture to compete better than weeds. If a pasture cannot compete better than weeds, the weeds will overcrowd it, will grow about it and suppress it. But a good pasture crops must be able to compete better and grow and subdue the weeds. This type of quality is often possessed by natural pasture because that's the natural environment, or like the artificial pasture. 3. Resistance to trampling. A good pasture must be resistant to trampling. Trampling is the term used when animals feed on the pasture. They walk and trample the grasses down. If it's a bad grass, by the time when the animal move on it first and second day, all the grasses are pressed and are dead. But good pasture grasses must be able to stand each time it is trampled upon. So it must be resistant to trampling. It must not die because animals trampled on them. Next, seed viability or profuseness. For pasture to be productive, it must produce plenty of seeds. And these seeds must be viable. Viable means must be healthy, must be capable of germinating or touching the ground. Then resistance to drought. Normally dry season will come. A farmer would not need to be planting grasses all the time. So the grasses on the farmland or on the natural pasture must be resistant to drought. That means when dry season comes, when protracted dry season comes, the grasses may look dried or burnt to the earth, but immediately the rain season commences, a good grasses must come alive again and sprout. Then we see that grass is resistant to drought. Pest and disease, resistant to pest and disease or pest and disease control. For pasture to be very productive, there must be no pest and disease in another area. If they are available, then there must be ready assistance to clear the pests and diseases. Then accurate stocking. Accurate stocking talks about putting adequate number of animals to feed on a particular portion of the grass. The pasture should not be overgrazed. That means it should not be overstocked. Too many animals must not be made to graze on a particular area of land at the same time. When that is done, then there will be overgrazing, and the pasture may slow in recovery or may not recover at all. Accurate stock. So adequate number of animals should be made to feed on the pasture. Then good management practices. There must be good management practices such as weeding, such as fertilizer application, such as watering. A farmer must make sure that he manage the pasture in a way that the pasture can continue to exist. These are the factors that affect the productivity of pasture. Persistence, aggressiveness, resistance to trampling, seed viability or profusness, resistance to drought, absence of pests and disease, accurate stocking, as well as good management. Okay, let's see, how do we establish pasture? If there's no pasture in the place, I want to establish my own pasture. I want to get a place for my goats to feed or my cattle. How do we establish a pasture? The first to do is to select a site. Site selection. You select a very good place. You must make sure the land is very fertile. Must be very fertile. Must have enough organic matter. When you select the site, you clear the bush. Clear the bush. It can be done with use of cutlasses and hoe, and stopping should be done, or you use machine. Then remove of debris. Everything you have cleared, you must pack everything. The land must remain bare and open. Clear the debris. You can put debris together and burn them or discard them. Then cultivation of sites. You try to loosen the soil. You harrow it. Grasses may not easily grow on a very hard soil. You harrow, you loosen it up. You may not make ridges or hips. You see a flat soil, but you punch it. The soil must be cultivated, must be well loosened up. Then planting of pasture crop. The plant, you must select the pasture crop you want to plant, because we are talking about artificial pasture now. You've got to look at the pasture that can develop very fast, pasture that can endure dry season, pasture that can resist trampling. All the factors we mentioned there, look for those pastures and that are compatible to the environment. So you select them and you plant them. After you have planted them, you come later and observe some did not grow. What do? You supply. Supply means you replant the vacant stands. All those empty places where the pasture seeds fail to grow, you replant. That's supplying. The planting of legumes. You have planted grasses, then you put some legumes in between. These legumes will help to revitalize the soil by introducing nitrogen to the soil. Promotion of tillering. What do you mean by tillering? Tillering is taken from the word tillers. Tillers are 2, 3, or 4 branches arising from a particular same point on a plant. When a plant is growing, everybody knows that branches are supposed to come at like ladder on the plant. Branches will come like a ladder. For you to have tillers, what we mean is that you want to multiply the grasses. Each grass, you want it to become 3 or 4. How do you do that? You cut, we call it cut back. After your grasses have grown, you cut them. When you cut them off, upon each point that those grasses are cut off, fresh branches or fresh grass stands like 4, 5, 6 will come upon each point. This is called tillering. Tillering in a natural pasture is done by burning. You burn it. But in an artificial pasture, tillering is done by cutting. So if it's a natural pasture, like in the north, you set the grass on fire, set ablaze. When the grass is during dry season, when the grass is burnt, then the new grass that will come will, in each point where one grass was burnt, about 6 will come up. That is tillering. But when you come at your pasture, you don't burn them. If you burn them, they may not recover. What you do is you cut. Once you cut it, that's tillering. Fresh grasses will emerge from each point that was cut. That's tillering. Then weeding. You have to weed, because this is talking about sown pasture, artificial pasture. You got to remove weeds by spraying with chemical or by clear cutlasses. Fertilizer application. Fertilizer must be applied so that the grasses can grow fast and can grow fresh. Then irrigation. You aid the artificial pasture or sown pasture. You aid during dry season. Because during dry season, they may not be able to survive. You irrigate. Paddocking. Paddocking is act of breaking the pasture into sections for easy feeding of animals. Paddock is also called rotational grazing. So for you not to totally wipe out your pasture, not to destroy your pasture, let's say this is the area of pasture, you break it to about 4. You have paddock A, B, C, D. You make the animals to feed the rotation. If animals spend 2 or 3 weeks here, they come again 2 or 3 weeks here, 2 or 3 weeks here. But then when they come back to paddock A, the guys in paddock A would have recovered. And then the animal can have things to feed on. If you just put animals on the farm to feed anyhow, they eat anything they see, and within a shorter period of time, there will be no pasture for the animal to feed. Rotational grazing or paddocking is used to control the feeding of the animals and the continuity of the pasture. Now let's go to common pasture management practices. How do you manage our pasture so that it can continue to supply us? Number 1 is burning. As I have said, burning, cutting. Burning, because to maintain your pasture, if it's natural pasture, you burn it once in a year or at interval based on your taste. When you burn it, fresh grasses will come up and there will be tillers. But if it is sown pasture, you don't burn, you cut it. Once you cut it, fresh grasses will come and fresh tillers. Tillers are young grasses coming out from a point. 6, 7 of them are from the same point. It aids multiplication of grasses. Fencing or paddocking, I have explained that. You fence it or you paddock it so that the animal can feed in rotation and the grass or legume can be preserved. For other application, I mentioned that weed control, you have to control the weeds so that the weeds do not overcrowd the pasture, especially on the sown pasture. Then, pest and disease control, this must be done for you to have quality grasses. Irrigation is necessary at dry season, especially for established pasture or sown pasture or artificial pasture. Last but not least is adequate stocking. I've said it before, adequate stocking involves putting the correct number of animals to feed on a particular portion of the pasture. You don't overstock. You put too many animals, then the pasture will be stressed and they will not recover. The adequate stocking enables you to control the number of animals put on the grass at the same time, so that the grasses can be preserved. I think we come to the end of pasture and forage crops. I guess you understand what I've just taught you. Should you have any some questions come up on your screen, make effort to answer them. Don't run away from them, attempt them. Should you have difficulty in attempting any of the questions, don't hesitate to go back to the video and have a good knowledge of the topic. God bless you.